Welcome, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the Pari-Mutuel Wagering Taxation Task Force to order. This is the fifth and looks like final meeting that we're going to have. And please call the roll.
Senator Rocky Adams. Senator Harper Angel.
Present remotely while traveling.
Thank you. Senator McDaniel.
Present in the room.
Senator
Present
West.
remotely while traveling.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Senator West. Representative Dixon.
Present in the room.
Representative Gentry.
Present in the room.
Representative Cook.
Here in the room.
Representative Petrie.
Present remotely from my annex office.
Thank you. Co-Chair Thayer.
Here in the room.
Co-Chair Koenig.
Here in the room. We have a quorum. Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize Representative Pfister, who's seen fit to come and join us and learn more. We appreciate that. You all have minutes for our previous meeting on October 4th. Chair will entertain a motion to approve them as submitted. Motion made by Representative Cook, second by Representative Dixon. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, we have 3 items on the agenda, and we're going to change the order just a little bit, and we're going to let Patrick Cummings with the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation begin. He is remote, and I believe he is out of town this weekend to celebrate his recent nuptials that he was not able to celebrate previously. So lest his family and in-laws think all he does is talk about this stuff, we want to get him in and out and so he can enjoy his time. So Pat, thanks for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. And I would have liked to have been there in person, but this is certainly the next best thing. So thanks for the opportunity. I'm just going to share my screen here with the slides and just make sure you can see this here in just a moment. Does that look okay?
It does. We can see it. I don't know if you want to expand it at all, but I believe
Yes, I
everyone has
can.
it.
I can, yes.
Everyone has it in their packet. I'm sure it's back in the back since we had you
All right.
further down, but yeah, I've got it.
All right, there we go. I've expanded it now. Okay. So thanks again for the invitation to be with you. The Thoroughbred Idea Foundation is a think tank and advocacy group. It's privately funded, and we simply seek improved outcomes for horse racing's optional, the voluntary financial participants in the sport, horse owners and horse players. Of course, that is the bettors. These are the stakeholder groups who choose to participate in the sport. And at your invitation, Chairman, I wanted to speak about an issue that might seem like it's a little bit in the weeds, but I think it certainly deserves as much attention as it can get, and that is improving pari-mutuel wagering for the customers, that is the bettors who basically help in such a large way of keeping racing going and all of its related agribusiness and various industries. Horse racing's ecosystem in America requires bettors and the revenue that their participation creates. As I said, bettors are horse racing's customers. And the decisions that are made legislatively across America on racing can have really far-reaching effects. But while you often see operators and horsemen come to these sorts of events, the bettors tend not to feel as recognized or as represented in these circumstances. And plenty of times, I think, horse racing's customers often feel like they get the short shrift. Now, look no further than this year's Breeders' Cup, where one of the actual winners of the races, a horse by the name of Modern Games, was recommended as a scratch by one of the California state veterinarians and then subsequently scratched by the stewards. Before a veterinary check was ever performed, the horse was removed from pari-mutuel pools, an action which more or less can't be undone. And the California rules of racing kicked in and Modern Games ran the race and won. While everybody who had a bet on Modern Games sat idly by and watched it and were losers or simply got a refund. For others in the race, somewhat unbelievably, losers became winners. Those who bet the second, third, and fourth place finishers were suddenly treated as if they had run first, second, and third. It was a really odd situation, and it was a substantial hit to horse players on a really premier stage, of course, one which is hosted in Kentucky with frequency and will be next year at Keeneland. The breeder, owner, jockey, trainer, they'll all be paid, but it was the horse players who took the brunt. And it's just one of many sobering realities for horse players. While rules have evolved to focus very rightly on welfare, safety, performance, and those sorts of outcomes, customer protections have not evolved. Track and betting operators actively seek the most favorable treatment possible. Horse owners and breeders enjoy the HHR-driven purse supplements in Kentucky and some other states, but they're also well looked after with depreciation rates and other tax considerations. But what about the customers? What about the horse players? The racing wagering proposition must be competitive. It must stay attractive to those who wish to spend their gambling dollars on such opportunities. Of course, those opportunities which help to fuel a Kentucky signature industry. There are plenty of alternatives, either legally across Kentucky's borders or much more easily and illegally from the comfort of one's Kentucky home via illicit online operators, many of whom now gladly take payments via cryptocurrencies. But today, I'm focusing on another currency and one that I hope the task force could help with: pennies. In 2020, horse players large and small, and really from all over the world, wagered just less than $11 billion on thoroughbred racing in America and another more than $1 billion on standardbred racing here. Racing wagering totals have remained fairly steady in recent years, but are well off highs from the early 2000s. If you adjust for inflation, total wagering on U.S. thoroughbred racing is down nearly 50% since 2003. Really, any way you look at it, no matter where those figures are down, that's bad news for Kentucky. In 2018, our organization penned a white paper called, quite simply, Penny Breakage. We asked the greater horse racing industry to consider a few key questions. Among them, how can the sport modernize pari-mutuel racing betting? How can the sport generate additional revenue for racing from racing, not supplementary sources? And how can the sport remain competitive, benefiting a Kentucky signature industry in the most competitive marketplace ever for wagering customers? The recommendations in this paper were to consider modernizing the way in which pari-mutuel winning dividends are calculated. Specifically, adjust breakage or the breaks from the nearest dime to the nearest penny. And believe it or not, this is within Kentucky legislative powers to adjust. I'll give you a brief explanation of breakage. If anyone's looking for a more detailed calculation of how it works, it is at the end of my slides, but I'm not otherwise going to get into the very super specific numbers of it all. Breakage is the difference between what winning racing bettors should be paid on winning bets and what they are paid. It might seem like an oddity that there's a difference between the two, but there is, and that difference is the breakage. Breakage is the rounding down of the return from winning pari-mutuel racing wagers. Kentucky statute requires that all pari-mutuel winnings be rounded down to the nearest 10-cent unit, and that's also the lowest 10-cent unit. All states have some form of breakage policies if they allow for pari-mutuel wagering. Some are instituted by rule, others statute, and in Kentucky, it is a statutory decision. The statute that's on the screen there is specific to thoroughbred racing, KRS 230.3615, 1 and 2, the breaks made to calculated to the dime. After deducting pari-mutuel takeout, the total pool is divided by the amount wagered on the winner or winning combination in an exotic bet. A very simple example where the winning dividend was, say, just more than $9.76, the payout gets rounded down to $9.70 for every $1 wager, and the rounded cents are the retained breakage. In most cases, there are fractions of pennies that are included. As of now, the breaks to the nearest lowest 10-cent unit are retained by the bet taker. That can be on track, which is a very extreme minority of total racing wagering, but is very often now off track or through ADWs. They get to keep the breakage. States determine where breakage that is retained at physical racetracks goes, but the amount that we're talking about within the state's actual control determination is very small. Here's a look at the last fiscal year in Kentucky. I'll show you a bigger time frame in just a moment. We know that Kentucky tracks held just more than $310,000 in breakage from winning dividends paid on track in the last fiscal year. But given those handle figures, if the on-track breakage rate was extrapolated across the entirety of betting on all races that were run in Kentucky, the actual total is more than $9.3 million, a sum which represents more than 96% of all those rounded down pennies that was held by bet takers for their own use. The vast majority of this money is never felt by Kentucky, yet it's never retained by Kentucky. And frankly, it's more or less been this way for pretty much the entire history of pari-mutuel wagering. There was a day and a time when the only way to place a bet on the Kentucky Derby itself, was at Churchill Downs on Kentucky Derby Day, waiting in line with cash. We know that has changed. Here's a small snippet from the Daily Racing Form of April 5th, 1938, citing the addition of more betting windows to speed up activity in the mutual department. Time was money, and counting out pennies was not appreciated by the tracks, and surely a few of the winning customers too. There was a day where breakage was highly convenient for the bet taker, and in reality, it did offer some modicum of convenience for the bettors, but of course at some degree of cost. Herbert Swope was a Pulitzer Prize winner. He was actually credited with creating the term Cold War, and he was even a former chairman of the New York State Racing Commission. This was his take on breakage from the New York Times, or published in the New York Times in March of 1940. His take from some 82 years ago defines the reality of the impact of breakage. Something done in the name of efficiency and not wanting to encumber bettors with, frankly, their own rightful winnings, mind you. These days are long gone, but the statutes requiring breaks to the dime remain in place, again, now into its 9th decade after these remarks. You have the ability now or at some point in the future to recommend some changes which could lead to amendments to existing statutes for how the breaks are calculated for races run in Kentucky, and impact not just those customers in Kentucky, but anyone outside of Kentucky who is betting on Kentucky races. Over the last 5 fiscal years, more than $2.5 million, the box highlighted in green here, has been retained by racetracks in Kentucky. Through agreements between the tracks and horsemen, they split this money. Of course, they all receive far, far more in supplements thanks to HHR. I believe that number is well over 145 million in the last 5 years, or at least equine industry interests that have received that money. The total estimated off-track breakage over that 5-year period of time is far higher than the amount that is retained on track, estimated over the last 5 years at roughly $33 million, 32.9 in that red box in the lower right. Over those 5 years, an estimated 93% of all breakage on Kentucky racing was retained by bet takers. We're talking about technology companies, the ADWs, off-track betting sites, simulcast tracks. The vast, vast majority of this money belongs back in the hands of the bettors, of the customers. The reasoning for which it was retained in the first place has been long antiquated. There should be little fear in doing so, because tracks, horsemen, and betting operators will surely see some of it come right back to them. There's every expectation that just as bettors do today, when they win their $10.20 or $75.30, they will reinvest portions of it back into subsequent wagers, restarting the cycle of takeout and payments back to the industry. This just gives them the opportunity to do more of it with their own money from their own pocket, not retained and rounded down and simply given back to the tracks or the technology companies. Certain pari-mutuel pools that have been offered for a very long time, place and show pools, could be enlivened with this amendment too. The normally lower returns in such pools are made even lower due to breakage. A horse that pays $2.60 to show very rightly could have paid $2.78 to show before calculating the breaks, extracting nearly 7% of the total return to the customer and well over 20% of the profit on a $2 bet. So our suggested consideration today, at some point, in some fashion, is to amend the statutes that apply. Shifting from dime to penny breaks is a simple and logical step to return rightful winnings to customers, help modernize pari-mutuel wagering, and make it more competitive in the present day. Very appropriately, Kentucky can be the first to put these rounded pennies back into the hands of customers. Let the customers choose what the customers want to do with it. Of course, there is a strategic advantage in being first as well, giving Kentucky racing an edge as a state whose races favor its customers, the betting public. Customers who bet Kentucky racing will receive higher returns than those who don't make these changes. Before I finish, I just want to take a moment to address and acknowledge a few items for consideration, some that we've addressed on our white paper, and I think it's just worth noting that first, that there are other ways to do this. This is not the only way. It is, however, probably the easiest way. Shifting from dime to penny breakage can be handled in a few other ways, but legislatively in this fashion, shifting from dime to penny is probably the simplest. If you're interested in hearing some other ways, I certainly would be very open to that. Second, in-person betting is not going away. Tracks will need to develop more modern ways to pay coins. Again, there are several options for tracks and simulcasting outlets to do this. Right now, if you bet a dime superfecta at Churchill Downs or Keeneland, those pay out up to the penny. So it's not as if we haven't been doing something like this already. We'd just be doing it on a bit of a grander scale. Mind you, though, that remains the smallest portion of overall wagering. A third piece here, and apologize, I was behind one slide there for you. Down at the bottom, while there's no public documentation on this matter, it's typically private. It's widely known amongst professional bettors, those who are wagering millions, sometimes even tens and hundreds of millions of dollars annually. They receive their breakage back to them as a rebate. Some customers are already getting this money paid back to them, and we would think it's much fairer to create a more level playing field for all customers. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I certainly look forward to your questions. I know this topic, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a bit in the weeds, talking about pennies, but years and years ago, legislatures across America decided to take the first step and take those pennies from customers in the attempt to provide some measure of convenience, albeit at some cost. The world has changed. Purse supplements have changed. Operators and horsemen have far greater sources of revenue now. I'd like to finish by calling on old Herbert Swope once again. He's credited with a line that I'm sure you've certainly heard from a legislative capacity in some point. He said, "I cannot give you a surefire formula for success, but I can give you a formula for failure. Try to please everybody all the time." You have a large body of constituents, not to mention the tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of customers outside Kentucky who play the races in Kentucky and for whom this would be a rare, favorable change in their direction. We greatly appreciate your consideration and any focus on modernizing this approach to pari-mutuel wagering that, frankly, we think just makes sense for racing's often forgotten stakeholder group, the bettors, the customers. I look forward to any questions you have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Cummings? Representative Gentry.
Mr. Cummings, thank you for that presentation. Just one question. I know it is getting in the weeds a little bit on breakage, but I've been well aware of this for quite a while. Being a horse racing fan and being a guy that likes to bet on the ponies, okay? But has there been any movement in other places, other states, to try to recoup some of the breakage, or recoup maybe not a good word, but a word directed more to the players themselves? And if so, is there anything that can be done to enhance the sport, maybe reward those players that actually come to the track or that participate more? Thank you.
Yeah, there have, Representative Gentry. There's been a couple steps that have been taken. Oaklawn Park in Arkansas pays a premium for on-track bets in I believe it's the show pool. So they actually pay I think it's 10% higher rate on show bets. They basically top up show bets on track. And so that has been one way. Now, mind you, Oaklawn Park has a very loyal following. It's in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and it has a really decent on-track attendance. So they're a bit of an outlier in that regard, but that was one way that they did that to kind of reward on-track customers coming and playing in those pools that might not otherwise normally get a lot of play. The state of New York is the only state that has addressed this topic. And they did it very similar to what Kentucky has done here with this task force. This was a wholesale review. I believe it was under Governor Mario Cuomo in the late 90s, if memory serves. But I know the former owner of the Daily Racing Form, Stephen Christ, was a member of a committee that looked into this. And they actually did change breakage policies on New York racing. This was one of the changes that I referenced. It's a little bit more really in the weeds, Representative. But for bets that return less than $10, the breaks go to the nickel. For bets that win between $11 and $50, I believe it goes to the dime. And then for bets that win more than that, it goes to the quarter. And then over a certain amount, the breaks go to the dollar. But our organization actually did do some research on this for the New York Racing Association several years ago when we first brought this topic up. And the reality was customers who bet on racing in New York, the breakage rate only ends up being about 0.4%, whereas in Kentucky, as I showed earlier, it's over about 0.6 or 0.6%. So one state tackled this a little bit. They made an adjustment in the 90s, and they haven't gone back to it since. This would be a more aggressive change for any American racing jurisdiction. And again, I think it's one that just makes a lot of sense to do at this time.
Anything further?
Just a brief statement on the issue.
Sure.
Really haven't given this a whole lot of thought yet, but initial thought is if there is a way to reduce the breakage a little bit and send it back to the bettor, could we do something like a handicapping competition on the last day of a meet? In order to be eligible to be in that handicapping competition, you have to partake in the sport a minimum amount of times. I don't know whether that's coming to the track or whatever. And there's actually a pool of money that everybody's trying to get. And I think you could do a lot of things from a marketing standpoint, from a publicity standpoint. And this is just one of many suggestions. The fear I have with adding a little bit to a show pool, how recognizable is that going to be, and what is the sport really benefiting from that, except the ardent gambler that actually pays attention to that small percentage? I don't know. But anyway, just a comment.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions? I'm just going to point out, and I've pointed this out, I think, publicly before, and mentioned it to the tracks and their representatives in the last few months, that there's really three things we need to make horse racing go. We need the breeders and the owners. We need the tracks, and we need bettors. And we've taken care of the first two. And if we do anything, and as far as I'm concerned, we're going to take care of the last group. And this is, one of the possible ways, and I think the easiest and best way to do it. I've encouraged the tracks to give me their thoughts and suggestions. I've not heard anything from them yet on this. I would have loved for it to have been their idea. And I think that if we did some or all of what's being suggested here, that not only would players benefit, but I think the tracks and the state would benefit, because more of that money would be put back in. And for people that do this on a regular basis, make their livelihoods in part by wagering, when you can get a better return and you bet enough money, it's worth it to take your money away from places that don't do that, to some place where you're going to get more return for your larger bets. And so I think it would attract more bettors and quite possibly be a money-making choice for the tracks. But they have business analysts that probably know better than I do about these things. But certainly it won't be a complete, for lack of a better term, loss. They will see more money come back in one way or the other. So something's going to happen in this regard, as far as I'm concerned, if going forward. So thank you, Pat. We appreciate you taking time out of your trip.
Thanks, Chairman.
All right. Next item, we're going to have Rick Hiles from the HBPA come and talk about the Thoroughbred Development Fund for Kentucky Racing. So we're going to send somebody down, make sure we got the PowerPoint working correctly.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Rick Hiles. I've been the president of the Kentucky Horsemen's Benevolent Protection Association since 1994. Also a director and advisor to the Kentucky Thoroughbred.
Can we make sure your microphone is on? Is the green light?
There you go.
There we go.
Now we
Thank
got
you.
it. Okay, did everybody hear me
Yes.
first? Okay. I've also been a director on the Kentucky Thoroughbred Development Fund Board, advisory board, that we do things. We're here this morning to speak to you about changing a statute to allow us to change the Kentucky Thoroughbred Development Fund payments. The Kentucky Thoroughbred Development Fund was started in 1978. The reasoning it was started at the time, different states, New York, Florida, California, were offering bigger purse money than we could do in Kentucky at the time, and we were losing a lot of our horses to these allowance races and non-claiming races in other states to run for bigger purses. So the thought process behind that was that if we developed this fund to incentivize Kentucky breds to stay at home in Kentucky and race more, not only did it help the owner, but it also decreased its costs, because going to the other places were more expensive to be there. At the time, the funding was minimal. We couldn't afford to put it on all the races for Kentucky breds, so they decided that the best thing to do was to put it into your non-claiming events, which would be maidens, allowances, and stake events, to the better, higher class horses. Unfortunately, claiming horses make up about 50% of the races, and they're only running for about 17% of the money. So it costs about the same amount to take care of these claiming horses as it does the better class of horses. Well, now we fast forward to the introduction of historical horse racing machines, and thanks to this legislative body, the benefits from that has created a lot more funding for the Kentucky Thoroughbred Development Fund, and we've been able to supplement purses. Probably 5 years ago, they were using what they called optional claiming races. It got to the point they couldn't fill the allowance races, so they allowed a horse that had run through its conditions to run for a claiming price in those races. at $25,000 or above. The problem was when they first started this, you had horses running for conditions, running for the full purse, and the horse that was running for the claimant price running for a lot less purse. So we decided that's not fair. All the horses in the same race should be running for the same purse. So they made the $25,000 claimers or $50,000 claimers, whatever they may be, that were running in those non-claiming races eligible for the KDDF fund too. But it also alienated the lower class of horses. So what we want to do is we've got quite a bit of money now that's in this fund, and so we feel that we can open this fund up to give to to claiming horses, not only the non-claiming horses, and without interfering with the purses on the upper level horses. We've got 4 facilities on board right now of the historical racing machines, and we've got 4 more that's going to be opening pretty soon. So the money generated is going to be quite a bit, and we would like to move that down. Now, the benefits of this, it's going to help the owners, number one, because they're going to run for more purse money. It may entice an average guy that wants to get into the horse racing business, such as Representative Gentry or somebody that more money that he can make with just a regular everyday claiming horse. Everybody can't afford, to spend $50,000 or $100,000, $200,000 on a horse, but they may be able to afford to spend $5,000 to $10,000 and get in a claiming race. And by putting this extra money to these claiming races, it allows an owner to recoup his investment. It allows him to enjoy the game, and it may even create more claiming going on, of which the general fund and the state benefits from that, because every time a horse gets claimed, this general fund gets a 6% sales tax on the value of that horse every time he's claimed. And just to put that in perspective for you, this year there's been 923 horses claimed for $22,400,000. So that has created just a little over $1.3 million for the general fund in revenues. It also is going to help the breeders, because when they put their horses in the sale and the progeny of the broodmare, the earnings per foal is maybe go up some, and so that maybe entice someone else to buy the horse more and pay more for the horse, because you look at how much the foals have earned out of a broodmare, and the more they earn, the more you're enticed to say, well, she's a pretty good producer. Let's take a chance on that. So anyway, we feel like that this is the right thing to do. It's going to help. We feel like the state. It's going to help the breeder. It's going to help the owner, and ultimately help the trainers too, because of their commission. Of course, all of this would have to go before the Kentucky Thoroughbred Development Fund Advisory Board to set the rates and how much each race would get. We wouldn't want to overload claiming races to the point that it became noticeably bad. But so we're here to ask you to consider this and to let us put money into non-claiming, to the claiming races now. So if you got any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
We do. Representative Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. House, for being here. I agree with everything you've said, especially the part about it costs just as much to keep a $5,000 claimer as it does an allowance horse. That's
Sure.
Absolutely true. And you then find so many of those people in those positions that own those horses were running for a purse that they can win that month, and it doesn't even cover the month training vet bills and stuff that they'll have. So we can definitely look at that, but I think there is a line that we have to be aware of and watch, as you well know, where we don't create an opportunity. There has to be a quality control in there to make sure we're not maybe somebody out there that would play to enter a horse that maybe shouldn't be running that day because the purse is so extremely high that they want to throw it in there. So I think with that, we have to be very aware of stick with our quality over quantity, and still taking care of the people because those are the backbone of the industry. You go to Turfway Park this winter, those are the people. That's what's keeping this industry running right here. So we need to help them. We need to increase those purses and make it work. But at the same time, let's not get crazy like some other states have done and created dangerous platform that's out there. So
And I agree
all
with
your
you.
work on that.
I agree with you. I think that our smaller tracks like Ellis Park and Turfway Park would benefit more from this than Churchill Downs or Keeneland would, because their purses are so much lower, and people are trying to having a hard time up there. Sometimes if they're running for a $7,000 or $8,000 person, they're shipping in or the training expense or vet bills. But I agree with you. We don't want to make them look unordinary to the public, or somebody looks at this and say, what are these guys doing, And so that's why this would have to go before the Kentucky Thoroughbred Development Fund Advisory Board to keep the levels that we would put on the smaller claiming races intact where it would be.
Yes, sir, and I agree with you. It's such a rewarding game. It's such a fun sport to get into, and just opening that up.
Yes.
I think,
Right.
give them a chance to make it a financial
Yeah.
option.
We don't want to
Viable,
overload. We don't want to
financially
overload them.
viable. Yes,
We don't
sir.
want to overload them. Just maybe a little supplement that, if you had 1,000 or 2,000 here and the guy's able to win it, he gets an extra 600, 1,200 a month. That
Makes
that
a
really
big
helps an owner,
difference.
and it may entice someone to say, this is a fun game, and the more people you get to participate in this, the more you're going to get back to the track, and we'll get to what Mr. Cummings was talking about. The ADWs have just taken over this industry to where we need the people to come back to the racetracks now, like they used to be.
Yes, sir. I couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Okay.
Co-Chair Thayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rick, Marty, good to see you. Full disclosure, I've known these two gentlemen for as long as I've been in Kentucky, and that's 29 years this month. And it's good to see you both. Rick, I'm really happy to see you're on the road to healthy recovery. Really
Thank you.
good to see you. You look and sound well, and that makes me very happy.
Been through a lot this year.
Yeah, well, we're glad you're here. I agree with everything these gentlemen presented today. Now, this is not a new idea, but it's an idea whose time has come. I tried to get it passed in 2009, but it got caught up then in the debate over HHR, which has now been settled with Senate Bill 120, 11 years later, 12 years later. But I think it's an idea whose time has come because we've got the money to do it. And, I participate in some racehorse partnerships, and it is a lot of fun, but it is extremely difficult to make money, even to break even. And I've been a part of 2 stakes winners and 2 stakes placed horses and have yet to show any sort of profit. Still hopeful that, we hit that one big horse and we're able to do that. But that's what we all pursue in these partnerships. But not every horse becomes a stakes horse. Not every horse becomes an allowance horse. And like you said, the numbers was it 50% of the races are claiming races. And that's the bread and butter, the backbone of the sport. And I think it's time that we change the statute and allow those some of those KTDF monies to be used for Kentucky breds that run in claiming races. I do agree with Representative Cook. We need to be careful not to overload them and have a situation like they had in New York, where the purses were so big on claiming races that it created an incentive to keep horses in racing that should have been retired. And we want to avoid that. I mean, let's make sure that the purses are commensurate with the horse's value. But I do think it's a great idea. It's been suggested that we statutorily set a floor for the level of claiming race that it would be allowed on. But I would rather we change the statute and keep it more broad, and then for all claiming races, and then let the KTDF Advisory Board make recommendations and actually set the rules through the Racing Commission. Am I correct?
I think you're absolutely correct. This because yourself, the races at Ellis Park and Turfway may need just a little more supplement than the ones at Churchill or Keeneland. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
I mean, during the winter, for example, Turfway Park is competing with Mahoning Valley in near Youngstown, Akron, Ohio area for those kind of horses, and it's not a very far drive, about 3-hour van ride up to Mahoning Valley to run your horse. So that's a competitive situation. During the summer, Ellis Park is competing with Indiana. And maybe Fairmont Park in Illinois, if it's now called FanDuel Race Park.
Right.
If things take off there like it could, that'll be putting some downward competitive pressure. So, do you think the best thing for us is to simply change the statute to allow KTDF money to be used for Kentucky breds running in claiming and starter allowance races, and then leave the details up to the KTDF Advisory Board with final sign-off by the Racing Commission?
I think that's absolutely correct. And You didn't mention Colonial Downs. We lost a lot of horses this summer to Colonial Downs. What it is, the claimers are leaving the state during the periods of Ellis Park and Turfway because the purses are so much bigger, and we want to keep them here. And keep in mind, this only will apply to Kentucky-bred horses that are being bred in Kentucky, and it won't apply to other states' breed.
And to be sure, claiming races run at Keeneland and Churchill are an important part of the daily race program there.
Exactly.
But what we need to remember is, to your point about Kentucky breds, the reason this program, and it's one of a kind in the country, we're the only state where we don't have races restricted just to state breds.
Right.
Every other state, they have races restricted just to state breds.
Right.
We say all comers come in the race, and we supplement the purses for an existing race. So a maiden at Turfways, if it's Kentucky bred, it's running for $60,000. If it's Pennsylvania bred, they run for $30,000.
Right.
It creates what when it was set up by Nick Nicholson and Don Ball and folks like that back in the day, it was set up to create an incentive for people to buy Kentucky breds at our sales from people like Representative Cook and the thousands of other people who do what he does, and then race them in Kentucky.
Exactly.
So as long as, and I think it's probably better to have a panel of people who are keeping up with this every day to make that judgment call rather than have the General Assembly set that level.
And to give you an example, myself, when I go to the sales or even looking at claiming a horse, if he's not a Kentucky bred, I just forget about him anymore. And I know a lot of owners are doing that too. They say, well, we're going to race in Kentucky. We want the Kentucky breds to be eligible for the money. By putting this down into the claiming races, it even enhances them more to look at that area.
It creates more demand for
Right.
our product and then gives people an incentive to race them in Kentucky.
Exactly.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Gentry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys for being here and addressing this issue. I'm really glad to hear this, and like he often does, Senator Thayer stole my thunder a little bit, but I just want to say, first of all, anything that makes the sport stronger and more accessible, I'm for. I agree with Senator Thayer. I don't think it should be us that is setting the amounts that get put into the claiming starter allowance races. The experts should be doing that, which is you guys. However, we need to give you the right to be able to do that because, you know, the claiming races is the heart and soul of horse racing on a daily basis at the track. You know, we have our big days where we go out there and we see the top horses come in from wherever to run the big stakes races. But if you're out there on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you guys know the heart of the business, the every day of the business is the claiming ranks, and your percentages bear that out. And what I have seen with a lot of my friends that follow horse racing that are not wealthy owners is they're getting involved in ownership in these little syndicates, and it's a lot of fun. And in many cases, they don't really make anything, but it's a nice way to get to the track and learn and get closer to the sport, meet the trainers, meet the jockeys, and it's a great thing. And that's how you get people involved that otherwise can't afford to get involved in the sport. So I think this will help that, and I would be very supportive of this piece of legislation. And there was one other thought I had too, and I've kind of lost it. Oh, let me just say this. I became a big fan of horse racing when I was like 8 or 9 years old. And I remember this like it was yesterday. This is when I became a horse racing fan. This is when I began a fan of gambling too, which may not be a good thing, but I won the pot at the end of the street in the neighborhood when Cannonade won the 100th running of the Derby. And I was on cloud nine. I think it cost me a dime to put in and pull that little name out of the hat, that all the neighborhood kids were involved with. And I think I won $2 out of it. And do you have any idea how much candy $2 bought in 1973 or 4 or whatever it was? And let's just say I came home that day and I learned a lot of life lessons. First of all, my mother taught me how to manage money better than going to the store and spending my whole $2 on candy. But what she didn't know is I learned a big lesson about networking, how many friends I acquired that day when I came 3 bags of candy home at 8 or 9 years old. And I think that's where I got my name. Little Alan, the littlest kid in the neighborhood, became Big Al that day.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point of what I wanted to say is whatever we can do to get more people involved with the sport that otherwise may not be able to afford to get involved in ways that they can actually get involved with. And I think this is a good thing, and that's all I need to say. I've talked way too
And
long. Thank you,
I will
Mr.
tell you
Chair.
one thing, for the people that want to get involved, and I don't care if it's a $5,000 claimer or a allowance race, the adrenaline rush and the thrill that they get when that horse is coming to the finish line first, you can't explain it. It overwhelms you. And so we used to have 8, 10, 12 horses in every claiming race. Now we reduced it down. We're getting 6 and 7, and we're trying to do something to pump that back up, to bring people back here to get more horses in those races. And that generates more tax revenues and everything for the state too. So it's just a win-win for everybody.
Senator McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to shift gears, guys, for just a quick second here, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm a finance guy talking about horses, not a horse guy talking about finances. So my questions might be super basic and even misphrased. Is there some, inside of the standardbreds, is there some kind of a purse change for Kentucky sires or anything in coming up in the next year? I've had this question posed to me, and I don't even know. I don't have a good frame of reference, even, to be frank. Is there some kind of a change in the standardbred purses coming up?
I'm not familiar with standardbreds.
Okay, so you just deal on the
the
third.
thoroughbreds.
I thought you guys dealt
Yeah.
both sides. Okay, never mind.
I believe Senator Thayer can answer that, or at least he believes it.
I think I can answer that. The Kentucky Sire Stakes is funded through the Kentucky Breeders Incentive Fund, which is funded by the sales tax on stud fees. And they are, I believe, it's at the Red Mile every September, and I believe they're thinking of expanding it either at the Red Mile or one of the new tracks in Oak Grove or Corbin. But if we can talk offline, I can probably put you in touch with someone who has more details on that.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Anything further? Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, and thank
We
you guys
appreciate
for
it.
listening to us.
Absolutely. Last but certainly not least, Mike Stone with the Kentucky Council on Problem Gaming. This is something I think is important and have had in my sports wagering bill the last few years. And before you all get started, let me just state, and people are surprised to learn this, between Pari-Mutuel wagering, the lottery, and charitable gaming, Kentucky does 0 for problem gaming. And that's unusual and frankly unacceptable. And so Mike is here as he works on loading up his PowerPoint. He has provided us voluminous information. Anything you want to know is in the packet, I believe. But we worked on a PowerPoint that will get to the point and kind of discuss what needs to be discussed. You good, Mike?
Where is the run the program?
Help is on the way.
I'm looking but don't see. Up here? Top left here?
Right there. See that? Yep.
This one? Okay. I'm a Mac guy. I'm not a Windows guy. So anyway,
All right.
thank you.
Absolutely. If y'all will introduce yourselves for the record before you
Certainly.
get started. Make sure your mics are on and close to you.
Yeah, I'm Mike Stone. I'm executive director of the Kentucky Council on Problem Gambling.
I'm John Arnett. I'm on the board of the Kentucky Council on Problem Gambling, and I'm not sure my mic is on.
Press the button
There we go.
and pull it closer.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, please proceed.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with the task force today. Our presentation will summarize the details in what the chairman said was the voluminous package that was presented to LRC for your review. And let's begin by making it clear the council is not anti-gambling. The council's mission is to increase awareness of problem gambling, promote prevention and research, and advocate for the availability of treatment. The council cites evidence that excessive gambling is a public health issue that can be best addressed through a state-operated program of evidence-based approaches to prevention, mitigation, and counseling. The council is not advocating to get funding for itself. It is advocating for services for the problem gambler and their families and for society. The council does not oppose nor advocate for gambling. Gambling simply exists. Statistics indicate a percentage of Kentuckians already are at risk or have a problem or addictive gambling disorder, which is defined by the American Psychiatric Association in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. The council's advocacy efforts focus on raising awareness of problem gambling, promoting responsible gambling, and helping the problem and addicted gambler and his or her family. The council notes two of the most significant factors for individuals to gamble to excess are opportunity and proximity. With expanded gambling opportunity in Kentucky, more people will be closer to increased gambling opportunity. The need for a publicly funded problem and addicted gambling education, prevention, and treatment program is justified more than ever before. The council urges the Kentucky General Assembly to authorize such a program and establish a recurring funding mechanism from existing and projected revenue the state will receive from legally approved gambling. Kentucky is a gambling state. Most Kentucky adults gamble, and gambling expansion over the last 10 years makes it easier to gamble. If people gamble, some will develop a gambling problem or addiction. The Harvard Medical School Division on Addictions meta-study remains the most cited reference of the extent of addicted gambling. It concluded 1% of a population suffers from a gambling addiction. That's about 30,000 adults in Kentucky. The same study pegs problem gambling at 3%, or some 90,000 Kentucky adults. A survey conducted by the University of Kentucky Survey Research Center showed 9,000 addicted gamblers and 51,000 problem gamblers in Kentucky, as well as 190,000 individuals at risk of developing a gambling problem. These figures align with the problem and addicted gamblers reported in the 2003 Legislative Research Commission Report number 316, Compulsive Gambling in Kentucky. That report supported the need for a publicly funded program to address problem and addicted gambling. A gambling problem is evident when someone continues to gamble in spite of recurring negative consequences resulting from or linked to the gambling activity. An advisory from the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration notes gambling problems are associated with poor health, several medical disorders, and increased medical utilization, perhaps adding to the country's healthcare cost. Specific notes are displayed on the slide. Gambling's potential impact on society and the value of increasing awareness of potential harm from excessive gambling can be inferred from last month's announcement by the National Football League that its NFL Foundation will grant $6.2 million over the next 3 years to the National Council on Problem Gambling, which will use the funds to increase prevention and responsible gambling messaging. The NFL, as well as the gaming industry, understands its social responsibility. Society pays for the criminal justice and government social services in place to address these problems. The impact is far from just the individual. Society shares in the cost. New and more comprehensive data can provide a better understanding of the scope of problems and plan an effective public health initiative. Academic studies indicate each addicted gambler costs society between $1,200 to as much as $19,000 per addicted gambler each year. Using these estimates and the prevalence of gambling in Kentucky, the impact to the state could be as low as $10 million annually or as high as $313 million each year. Regardless, the benefits of addressing problem and addicted gambling will lower the social cost of the disorder in Kentucky. Expenditures on problem gambling services have shown a positive return on investments in other jurisdictions. Nationally, the 40 states and territories with publicly funded problem gambling services spend an average of 23 cents per person, according to a report from the National Association of Administrators of Disordered Gambling Services. In Kentucky, that extrapolates to slightly more than $1 million. Following the release of LRC Report number 316, the Kentucky Council on Problem Gambling developed a 5-year plan implementing problem gambling services, beginning at $1.4 million in year 1, increasing to $3.7 million in year 5. The state now receives around $300 million annually in receipts from legislatively sanctioned gambling. A projection cited in a recent Pari-Mutuel Wagering Taxation Task Force meeting estimated increased revenue from historical horse racing at more than $50 million per year, without any changes to the tax on Pari-Mutuel wagering. Even funding at 5% of that projected annual increase in state revenue from legal gambling would fund a credible program in Kentucky. Problem and addicted gambling is a public health issue that can be best addressed through a state-operated program of evidence-based approaches to prevention, mitigation, and counseling. The Council urges the General Assembly to designate a portion of the revenue received from legal gambling to fund a public program of problem and addicted gambling education, prevention, and counseling services. The opportunity and means are before the General Assembly. Now Mr. Arnett has a brief statement.
Thank you, Mike. I'm a member of the board of the Kentucky Council on Problem Gambling, and I'm also a recovering compulsive gambler. I am one of those statistics that is mentioned by Mike Stone. I'll skip the second sentence because I am here. I've recovered from the health problem that I had. I was a practicing attorney in Northern Kentucky for almost 40 years. I began gambling in 1999 at various casinos and racetracks. I developed a gambling addiction over a period of several years to the extent it cost me my career, my home, livelihood, and eventually my freedom, as I stole from clients to feed my addiction. I ultimately was charged with multiple felony counts of theft and forgery, convicted and given a 10-year prison sentence, of which I served 3 years. Compulsive gamblers in this state would greatly benefit from programs created and funded by legally approved gambling legislation to be used for awareness, prevention, and treatment of gambling addiction. Currently, most medical insurance carriers do not cover inpatient treatment for gambling addiction, nor other treatment options that would be covered by such legislation. It is imperative that this addiction be addressed in its earliest stages. Gambling addiction is a progressive disorder, and recovery is most effective if help is available in its earliest stages. It is a disorder that is not widely understood. I will respond to any questions.
Thank you for your time and consideration, and may we respond to any questions that the task force may have.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Thank you, Mr. Arnett, for coming and telling your story. Appreciate that. First, before I open up to questions, I've been informed via text that all tracks do put some amount of money and effort to problem gaming, so I didn't mean to insinuate that they didn't. I'm just was trying to say that we, as a General Assembly and the government, have never required that. Won't put any funds to it, or require that funds be put to it. So, but we do appreciate that. So, any questions for our presenters? Representative Gentry.
I feel like I'm asking a lot of questions today.
That's all right.
Guys, thanks for being here. Probably know I've long been an advocate for problem gaming or tax revenues from gaming activities to go toward expanding the programs that you guys offer, and thanks for what you do. You talked a little bit about opportunity and proximity being the drivers here of problem gaming, and societal costs that go along with problem gaming or gambling, gaming, whatever you want to refer to it. Can you give us some specific examples of the problems that are presented that we see that drive up societal costs, so to speak? Just some real life examples for people that might not be thinking through the second or third layer.
The statistics are that addicted gamblers have the spouse and family of addicted gamblers suffer from significant additional abuse that needs to be taken care of. Employment, loss of productivity, unemployment insurance costs can be traced to gambling. Bankruptcy is a significant cost for gambling. And then, of course, the criminal justice costs of prosecution and what goes into embezzled funds and all of those pieces that are lost on both the public side as well as the personal side of those issues. And of course, the one that is most significant to counselors is that addicted gamblers have a higher rate of suicide than any other addictive disorder. It tops them all. And if you go to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting and talk to those who are in attendance, it's rare that any of the attendants have not thought about suicide.
So it,
Good.
continue, Mr. Chair, thank you. So it's pretty accurate to say additional crime, evictions, bankruptcies, foreclosures, these are all common things and tend to generate more government management issues at the local level, as much if not more than at the state level. And I've said before that I think two of the glaring omissions we have with our tax revenues is you guys, more investment in problem gaming. I see this states all over the country, and the other thing is there's not one penny that goes into local government. Now, I know I mentioned that on a TV show earlier, and did not know that League of Cities and CAICO wasn't pushing that, and was really surprised to hear that. But, if they're not pushing it, then why should I? But at least you guys really want to see something done for you guys. And I think you play a very important role. And I also want to congratulate the gentleman beside you who's a recovering addict. And you could probably talk on this better than anybody because you've had personal experiences, and it's a real thing. And I also want to mention, too, for people that are listening and don't know this, there's a little bit of a backstory. Mr. Stone might be able to talk about this a little bit, about the role that Tom Meeker, a former president, had on seeing the interest in your type of work way back when. And so I don't want to address this as somehow pointing fingers at the horse racing industry, because I don't really think that's accurate. But Tom knew the importance of this, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he can advocated for the type of work that you do. So if you want to comment on that, you're more than welcome.
Well, I'll be happy to say first that all of the horse racing tracks in Kentucky are members of the Kentucky Council on Problem Gambling, support our efforts, and utilize our awareness materials. But our position is that's not, as a whole, they can't possibly contribute enough to address the problem that as the state could from a program. Back in the early 90s, the founder of the Kentucky Council on Problem Gambling, Dr. Curtis Barrett, some of you may know, was director of the backstretch program at Churchill Downs that Tom Meeker founded. And the program was founded to address the substance use and alcohol issues among the backstretch personnel. And Dr. Barrett was discovering that some of the people that he was counseling, and because they were being tested for substances, they were clean in that regard, but they weren't improving emotionally and health-wise. So he started to investigate, and he found out that they were gambling to excess. And then he found out there really was a thing from Dr. Custer at Brecksville VA Hospital in Cleveland that addicted gambling was being recognized from the American Psychiatric Association. So he went and spoke with Mr. Meeker, and between Mr. Meeker and Mr. Gleason at the Kentucky Lottery, the two of them arranged to have the initial funding for the Kentucky Council on Problem Gambling. So they were instrumental at the start. When Mr. Gleason passed, we named a Responsible Gaming Leadership Award in his name, and the first recipient was Mr. Meeker.
Thank you very much for that, and just ask my colleagues to remember, opportunity and proximity are the drivers of this type of activity. Also want to reiterate the fact that most of the people that participate in gaming activities do not have these problems, but there are a percentage that do, and for those, gambling is here. It's always been here. It's getting more and more accessible, even though some of the forms aren't legal here. Legalizing gives us an opportunity to regulate it and treat it and have better opportunities for better outcomes. It's just my opinion. Thank you very much.
If I could follow up on some comments by Mike. When I
Yes,
was dealing with the onset of my addiction, the biggest handicap that I had was consulting a certified gambling counselor. As Mike's commented upon this issue in his notes, there are now 5 certified counselors available in Kentucky. That's woefully inadequate. At the time I was seeking the services of a counselor, I could only find one. And God rest his soul, he's dead now, and that was Bud Newman from Louisville. Whereas we appreciate the contributions by the horse racing industry to our organization, the amount of money we receive is woefully inadequate. There are no inpatient treatment facilities in this state. There, as I mentioned, there are no certified counselors in my area, and there's only very few throughout the state. That can only be arranged by legislation that would pay for those kind of facilities. If I could have just had help early on, it would have changed my life. I can assure you of that. Whereas I'm a disbarred attorney now, if you look at my case that's widely reported, you'll find that mentioned in that case is I had no disciplinary issues before the bar in the 40 years I practiced. This is a progressive disorder, and once it gets a hold of you, it's not something you can deal with yourself. You need professional help. It's just a matter of time until you meet someone that you know and you know well that suffers from what I've suffered. I've been now clean for 8 years, and I attend Gamblers Anonymous as well as participate in our organization, so I ask for your help.
Thank you. Anything further on this topic from other members of the... I just have one comment, which is I believe that we need, with the advent of these of the HHR facilities, we need to have a self-exclusion list, or require that there be a self-exclusion list. They may do that on their own, but that be done, and that they are able to share that information with or required to share that information, I should say, with other tracks, and and that's pretty typical with casinos across the country. So that'll be in any legislation I may file. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate the task force
Thank you so much.
putting up with us. Thank you.
Nah, we appreciate what you do. All right. So we've heard lots of good testimony in 5 meetings. You all received a draft report that included the information from the first 4 meetings. Co-Chair Thayer and I have discussed this, and I believe he has a motion on the draft report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do. First of all, I would, since this will be our last meeting, I want to thank the staff led by Jennifer Hayes, Tom Hewlett, Kevin Branscombe, Chase Odell, and Grant Minix. They've done a great job working with us. This added, of course, to their burden for the regular committees that they do. In particular, I want to point out the excellent writing done by Jennifer Hayes and Grant Minix on the draft report. Very well done. It's extremely well written and accurate, and it sums up well the testimony we've heard before this task force. So thank you very much for that. So what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, is make a motion that we accept this draft as the report of the Pari-Mutuel Wagering Taxation Task Force, while allowing it to be amended with the written testimony summary from today's meeting at the discretion of the 2 co-chairs.
So that is a motion. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Second by Senator Harper Angel. Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Does everyone find that satisfactory?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Representative Petrie.
Yeah, is this I just want to make sure I've got the right draft I'm looking at. This is the draft we received by email yesterday afternoon around 4:30.
Yes, sir.
Draft? Okay. Does it have, just want to make sure, about 21 pages on it?
Believe so.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Any other questions on the motion? Seeing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
Okay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and motion carries. Anything else for the good of the order? Not. I appreciate all the members' participation in this task force, and I would like to echo Co-Chair Thayer's comments about the staff. We appreciate everything you've done, and it's been I think a good task force, and we've learned a lot, and we'll have a lot of good suggestions and thoughts to deal with come the session. So having come to the end of the agenda, we stand adjourned. Thank you.